Hi guys, this is Sam and welcome to Logic. In my last pronunciation video, which you can find over here, I talked about the terrible TH sound, more specifically about how and when to produce it, especially in tricky consonant combinations. Today we're going to analyze the most common mistakes that foreigners make when creating the sound, and also all the variations that native speakers use. We will also talk about how in England we perceive people's accents. So now let's get started. As a quick technical recap, the TH sound is a fricative sound, meaning that it's obtained through the friction created when air flows through a tiny little gap between two articulators that get really close to each other without touching. It's a dental sound, meaning that your tongue goes between your upper and lower teeth. So, in order to create the sound correctly, you want to put your tongue between your teeth, leaving a tiny little gap between your top teeth and the tongue. You don't want to bite your tongue fully, otherwise you will create a full plosive sound and you will literally explode. We have a voiceless version without any vibration in your vocal cords, and a voiced version with vibration. As you can see, both th and v are physically produced exactly the same inside the mouth. The only difference is the vibration in your vocal cords. In order to get our tongues working, we will use the same sentence as last time, which goes like this. Samantha thinks that Thomas thought that that pathetic thin mother couldn't be bothered to breathe deep breaths through her mouth. Because of that, her death didn't occur by a hair's breadth. Then, without further ado, she went home and had 3 baths. Sticking your tongue out for this sound will make you feel stupid and embarrassed, but that's exactly how we speak. Not producing this sound correctly will hinder the conversation, and don't worry, native speakers will not mock you because for us, it's absolutely normal. Some languages that don't have the TH sound swap th for s, th for z, and sometimes they also mix up s and z. We have teeth, teeth, tease, think, sink, with, whiz, thought, sort, thing, sing, clothing, closing. Now let's talk about accents. There's absolutely nothing wrong with having your own accent, be it native or non-native, because accents are not just a different technical production of sounds, but they also shape our personality and they make us who we are. But as a non-native speaker, you need to make sure of 2 things. First, that your accent doesn't hinder the conversation. If what you say is unintelligible, people will find it very tiring and off-putting to talk to you, even if your accent is native, so it's technically not your fault. And I will give you an example. A couple of years ago, I watched a Scottish film with James McAvoy called Filth. In the film, they use a very thick, native Scottish accent, which I couldn't understand, and throughout the film I was exhausted because I was trying very hard to focus not on the film itself but on what they were saying, and when the film finished I literally remember going like that. I was so tired that I had to close my eyes and sleep for a while. Any Scottish accent is a native variation of English, but to my ears it was so difficult to understand that it made it uncomfortable for me and my brain to follow what was happening. The second thing that you need to understand is how we perceive accents in England. I can't speak for the rest of the UK because I don't really know if the same applies to them, but it definitely applies here. As terrible as this sounds, and although we do this much less now than we used to in the past, in England we sort of judge or categorize people based on the way they speak and their accent. We associate these elements with their social class, the money that they have, and their education. It mainly happens among native speakers though. Here's an example. If you have a clear, sophisticated accent, we assume that you had a very expensive education or you come from a family that had it, which means that your family has a lot of money, which in turn means that you come from a higher social class, and this can be perceived as a negative thing, actually. Since I have a very clear accent, some people may assume that I went to very expensive schools where I was taught to speak RP, but that's not true at all because I don't come from money. I come from a family of farmers, and this is just the accent that I so happen to have. The south of England is considered to have more sophisticated or posh accents than the north, and going back to the fact that accents shape your personality, this is the prime example of that theory. The clearer your accent is, the colder and more emotionally detached it sounds, which results in southerners being less friendly. In the north, they may not have technically perfect and accurate accents, but these accents are friendlier, so northerners are more welcoming and generally friendlier than we are here in the south. And I noticed this in myself. The accent that I'm using now to talk to you is my natural, normal accent, which I know sounds very detached and cold. Now, I don't consider myself cold because my Italian roots compensate for that, but I am very aware that that's how people may perceive me purely based on the way that I speak. I'm keeping my natural accent now because I want to give you the best that I can in terms of British pronunciation, but when I teach students, I actually change it into a friendlier and more welcoming accent because I want my students to take to me and to feel comfortable. I'm not actually sure I can do it now because I'm talking to a camera and not to a real person, but what I do to change my accent is mainly work on my intonation. In my natural accent, my intonation is very marked. I go up and down a lot. Car, car. I speak with this intonation. When I try to make it a little bit friendlier, I still have the pattern typical to British intonation, but I think it's less marked. So instead of saying, I speak with this intonation, I would say, I speak with this intonation. Again, I'm not 100% sure it came out as well as it could have, but I did try my best. But now, let's go back to my natural accent. Why is all of this important to us? Since we see a clearer and more sophisticated accent as a sign of elegance and better education, if you want to make a good first impression in a formal context, for example, a job interview, unfortunately, a thick regional accent will leave a weaker mark. It's very important to note that this is just a general observation of what happens in England as a general rule. It doesn't mean that everyone lets someone's accent affect their opinion of them, and as I said before, it's becoming less and less common. But I think it's something that we all at least subconsciously notice when someone speaks, and as foreigners, I think it's very good for you to be aware of this fact. And please don't shoot the messenger. I'm only telling you how things work in England. It doesn't necessarily mean that I agree with it. While swapping th for s is just a foreign mistake, there are some variations of the th sound that are typical to native English accents, but I suggest you stick to your RP or standard English version with your tongue coming out, especially in English exams, because these sounds do exist, but they are considered to be lazy English. I will walk you through these options just so you can understand them when you hear them, but again, I strongly suggest you stick to your standard pronunciation. The first variation is to go from th to t, where the tongue goes inside your mouth against your alveolar ridge, and it's voiceless. The same goes for d, where the tongue goes back inside, but it's voiced. When this happens, sometimes we understand a different word, sometimes we don't. Thank, tank, thigh, tie, thick, tick. And be very careful with the word third, because by not pronouncing the th, I hear turd, which is a long piece of shit. Especially in Cockney, which is an accent of East London and Essex, the county next to London, and in some northern accents, the voiceless th becomes th, where you use your top teeth and your bottom lip, and the voiced v becomes v, where again you use the same production but only with vibration in your vocal cords. Sometimes we understand a different word that we only understand from the context, sometimes we don't. If I say 3 in Cockney, I will say free, which is exactly like the adjective from freedom. We have thought, fought, thin, fin, threat, fret. Sometimes, however, we don't have a different meaning. Instead of saying think, in Cockney you simply say think. Although there are no specific minimal pairs for the, meaning that we don't understand something different by changing the sound. Instead of saying the, in Cockney you would say mother, brother, father. But we don't usually do that at the beginning of a word. I think they say more of a d, so day instead of they, or they might keep the th going, they. Be very careful because all of these variations are very tempting because they're actually much easier to produce than sticking your tongue out. But I strongly encourage you to try and stick to th and the. A great combination of words to practice is 3 free trees. If we change it for t, as we saw at the beginning, we get 3 free trees. And if we go Cockney, we will get 3 free trees. But what I want you to do is 3 free trees. Let's go back to our original sentence one last time so we can practice our THs again. Samantha thinks that Thomas thought that pathetic thin mother couldn't be bothered to breathe deep breaths through her mouth. Because of that, her death didn't occur by a hair's breadth. Then, without further ado, she went home and had 3 baths. And that's it for today. If you liked this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and to subscribe to my channel down below. And please do let me know in the comments your experience with the terrible TH sound. And in the meantime, I will see you next week with my next video.